How to prune toxic thoughts starting today. Did you know that 80% of your daily thoughts are negative? Scientists have discovered our minds naturally drift toward pessimism as a survival mechanism hardwired into our brains. Like an overgrown garden choking out potential happiness, these thought patterns limit us. In this video, I'll show you how to transform your mind from chaos into a thriving garden. Imagine waking up feeling lighter, your thoughts naturally flowing toward solutions instead of problems. You'll learn precise techniques to identify toxic thought patterns, uproot them, and replace them with life-giving alternatives using the practical ADDI framework that's helped thousands reclaim their mental landscape. The Untended mental landscape, analyzing your current garden. Picture your mind as an actual garden for a moment. What happens when you leave a real garden unattended for months or even years? Nature doesn't politely wait for your return. Weeds aggressively spread their roots, choking out flowers and vegetables. Nutrient levels in the soil deplete. Pests move in, unchallenged. The once organized rows and beds disappear beneath tangled overgrowth. This same process unfolds in an untended mind, though we rarely recognize it happening in real time. This is why the analysis phase is the crucial first step in mental gardening. Just as a gardener must survey the land before planting, you need to understand what's currently growing in your mental landscape. Without this awareness, any attempts at transformation become random acts rather than strategic cultivation. The ADDI framework, analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation, provides a systematic approach to this inner work, with analysis serving as the foundation for everything that follows. Most people move through their days completely unaware of their thought patterns. They experience the effects, anxiety, frustration, self-doubt, without recognizing the sources. These toxic thought patterns spread beneath the level of conscious awareness, creating a profound disconnect between the life they desire and the reality they experience. Consider how a project deadline might trigger cascading thoughts of inadequacy, or how a casual comment from a colleague can spiral into assumptions about your professional worth. People wonder why happiness feels so elusive while unknowingly cultivating the very thoughts that prevent it. When negative thought patterns repeat, they create neural pathways in your brain that strengthen over time. This is neuroplasticity at work. Your brain physically adapts to your most frequent thoughts. Each time you repeat a thought like, "I'm not good enough," the pathway becomes more established, making it easier for your mind to travel down that same road again. Without intervention, these pathways become mental highways that your thoughts automatically travel, often without your conscious permission. The impact of untended negative thoughts extends beyond mood into physical health. Research from psychoneuroimmunology shows these thoughts trigger your body's stress response, flooding your system with cortisol and adrenaline. When chronic, this suppresses immune function, increases inflammation, and contributes to numerous health conditions. Consider how rumination about a workplace conflict might manifest as tension headaches or disrupted sleep. Your thoughts become biology, affecting everything from cellular repair to cardiovascular health, determining both psychological and physical well-being. Cognitive distortions act as invasive species in your mental garden. These systematic errors in thinking distort reality and reinforce negative perspectives. Catastrophizing turns minor setbacks into disasters, like interpreting a single critical comment as evidence your entire project is failing. Black and white thinking eliminates nuance. Mind reading assumes the worst about others' thoughts. Personalization takes everything as a reflection on you. These distortions function like aggressive weeds, consuming the limited resources of your attention and energy. To begin analyzing your mental landscape, start with a simple assessment. For the next week, notice recurring negative thoughts. When do they appear? What triggers them? Which ones cause the most distress or lead to problematic behaviors? Perhaps during morning commutes you repeatedly worry about job security, or family gatherings trigger thoughts of inadequacy. Look for patterns: perfectionism, fear of rejection, or guilt about boundaries. Notice the emotional fingerprints these thoughts leave behind: anxiety, shame, anger, sadness. These emotions often signal important underlying beliefs. Pay special attention to your inner critic, the voice that comments on your appearance, achievements, relationships, and worth. What specific messages does this voice repeat? When did you first begin hearing these messages? Who in your life might have originally voiced these judgments? Understanding the origins of your inner critic helps you recognize when you're hearing internalized messages from others rather than objective truth. Also notice your relationship with uncertainty. Do thoughts about the future generate excitement or anxiety? Do you find yourself constantly seeking reassurance or avoiding situations where outcomes aren't guaranteed? Your tolerance for uncertainty reveals much about your underlying belief systems and how you process potential threats. Examine the stories you tell yourself about your capabilities and limitations. Do you have rigid rules about what you can and cannot do? Do you automatically dismiss certain possibilities because that's not who I am, or people like me don't do that? These narratives form the boundaries of your mental garden, determining what can and cannot grow there. This analysis process might feel uncomfortable. Many have built sophisticated avoidance strategies to keep from confronting painful thoughts. You might notice resistance, a sudden urge to check your phone during quiet moments, or to fill silence with noise. This resistance itself is valuable information. The thoughts generating the strongest avoidance often hold the most potential for transformation. When toxic thoughts grow unchecked, they create self-reinforcing cycles of negativity. Negative thoughts trigger negative emotions, creating more negative thoughts. Your attention narrows to focus on problems while filtering out positive information. Your behaviors change, withdrawing from others or engaging in unhealthy coping, which creates circumstances that seem to confirm your negative beliefs. Meanwhile, pathways for constructive thoughts weaken from disuse, making positive thinking increasingly difficult. The good news is that becoming aware of these patterns is itself transformative. The simple act of observing your thoughts creates space between you and them. You begin to recognize thoughts as mental events passing through consciousness rather than absolute truths demanding belief. This awareness is the first step toward freedom from toxic thought patterns. Understanding your mental landscape is the foundation for transformative change. With awareness, you gain the power to consciously choose which thoughts to water and which to weed out. You recognize that the garden of your mind is not fixed but fluid, constantly responding to your attention and intention. The garden blueprint, designing your ideal mental landscape. Option 3 feels most aligned with what we need here. With this inspiration, let's begin our section. Now that you can see what's actually growing in your mental garden, it's time to create the blueprint for what you want instead. Have you ever noticed how pulling weeds creates the perfect environment for those same weeds to return if nothing new is planted? This principle applies fundamentally to mental transformation. Without a deliberate design for what you want to cultivate, your mind naturally defaults to familiar patterns, even when those patterns no longer serve you. Imagine if you could completely redesign your mind from scratch. What would you choose to grow there? This question forms the essence of the design phase in our ADDI framework. This stage creates a clear blueprint for your ideal mental garden, setting specific intentions for what you want to cultivate. Think of it as drawing out the perfect garden layout before breaking any ground. You wouldn't randomly scatter seeds in a physical garden, yet surprisingly, many people approach their thought patterns exactly this way. One of the most common mistakes in personal development is focusing exclusively on eliminating negative thoughts without having a clear vision of what positive thoughts should replace them. Nature abhors a vacuum, and this principle applies equally to your mind. When you remove negative thoughts without intentionally planting positive alternatives, that mental space quickly refills with the same toxic patterns you were trying to eliminate. The design phase prevents this cycle by ensuring you have a comprehensive plan for what goes in place of the weeds. The garden metaphor reveals fascinating truths about our thought patterns. Just as some plants naturally crowd out others through their root systems or canopy coverage, certain thought patterns can overwhelm and displace others. Thoughts of gratitude naturally push out thoughts of lack when consistently cultivated. Some thought patterns, like perfectionism, require constant maintenance and pruning to keep them from overtaking your mental landscape. Others, like self-compassion, provide nourishment that strengthens your entire mental ecosystem, making it more resilient against invasive negative thoughts. Research in visualization techniques offers compelling evidence for the power of mental design. A 2019 study published in the Journal of Cognitive Enhancement demonstrated that participants who regularly visualized their desired mental state showed measurable changes in neural activity patterns. The researchers found that mentally rehearsing specific thought patterns for just 10 minutes daily created stronger neural templates that gradually became default pathways in the brain. Visualizing your ideal mental garden actually helps your brain begin building it. Think of your core values as the foundation plants in your mental garden. These are the stabilizing elements that everything else grows around, the oak trees and cornerstone shrubs that define the character of your landscape. If compassion is one of your core values, it becomes a central feature in your garden design, with related thoughts and beliefs arranged around it. If growth is a core value, it might manifest as an area dedicated to learning and expansion. By identifying these foundation elements first, you create a mental landscape with structural integrity that can withstand life's inevitable storms. What are the 3 to 5 core values you want as the foundation of your mental garden? Perhaps it's authenticity, courage, connection, curiosity, or contribution. These values should occupy the prime real estate in your mental blueprint, acting as anchors when invasive thoughts attempt to take root and providing reference points for decisions about what else to cultivate. Envision your mental garden blueprint like this. At the center are your core values, perhaps represented by sturdy trees. Branching outward are pathways leading to different garden sections, each dedicated to specific thought patterns and emotional states you want to nurture. For example, creating your mental garden schematic involves mapping desired thought patterns, emotional states, and beliefs as different sections of your garden. Ask yourself, what emotional states do you want to experience regularly? What thought patterns would support your goals and well-being? What beliefs about yourself and the world would serve you better than your current ones? You might designate a section for self-belief thoughts, another for relationship-nurturing perspectives, and another for growth mindset reflections. Perhaps include a meditation pond where thoughts can settle and become clear, or a wild meadow where creative ideas can flourish without constraint. This approach transforms abstract concepts like positive thinking into a tangible, visual structure that your mind can work with effectively. This blueprint becomes more powerful when you consider the natural relationships between different mental elements. Just as companion planting in physical gardens creates beneficial relationships between plants, certain thoughts naturally support and enhance others. Thoughts of self-worth make vulnerability less threatening. Perspectives of abundance make generosity more natural. Understanding these relationships allows you to design clusters of complementary thoughts that reinforce each other. The detail in your blueprint matters significantly. Vague intentions like, "I want to be more positive," provide insufficient guidance for your mind. Instead, specify exactly what positive means to you. Is it optimism about the future? Appreciation for the present? Compassion toward yourself and others? The more specific your design, the more effective your mental gardening efforts will be. Your brain responds to precision, not generalities. This blueprint becomes the reference point for all your future mental gardening work. When uncertain about whether to nurture a particular thought or remove it, consult your design. Does this thought align with your blueprint? Does it contribute to or detract from the garden you're trying to create? Without this reference point, mental cultivation becomes arbitrary and inconsistent, subject to moods and circumstances rather than guided by intentional design. In any ecosystem, including your mind, resources like attention and emotional energy are finite. Thoughts compete for these resources. The strongest ones dominate your mental landscape, growing larger and influencing smaller patterns. When you design your ideal mental garden, you're deciding which thoughts deserve your resources and which don't. This transforms mental cultivation from a vague aspiration into a practical exercise in resource management, something concrete that you can implement systematically. The Gardener's Toolkit, developing mental cultivation techniques. Deciding where to distribute your mental energy is only the first step. You still need the right tools to make that distribution happen. While many believe willpower alone can reshape thought patterns, the reality is that specific cognitive techniques act like specialized gardening implements, each designed for a particular aspect of mental cultivation. Without these tools, even the most perfect blueprint remains unrealized potential. The development phase of ADDI is where we equip ourselves with these precise instruments for transformation. Think about a physical gardener for a moment. They don't approach their garden with vague intentions of making it better. Instead, they arrive with specific tools: pruning shears for overgrowth, trowels for planting, watering cans for nourishment. Similarly, your mental garden requires specialized techniques rather than the ambiguous approach of thinking more positively. This is where most people stumble. They set intentions to change their mental landscape, but lack the specific cognitive tools necessary to execute that change with precision. In my work with clients over the years, I've observed a common pattern. Most begin their mental transformation journey with enthusiasm, but quickly become discouraged when their efforts yield minimal results. The missing element? A comprehensive toolkit of specific, evidence-based techniques they can apply consistently. Mental gardening requires having the right implements for each task. Let's start with your primary pruning tool, cognitive restructuring. This technique operates like high-quality pruning shears, allowing you to methodically identify, challenge, and replace unwanted thought patterns. The process begins with awareness, noticing when a negative thought appears. You then examine its validity by asking questions like, what evidence supports this thought? What evidence contradicts it? Am I confusing feelings with facts? The power of cognitive restructuring lies in its systematic approach. Rather than simply saying, I shouldn't think that, you're conducting a thorough examination of each thought's roots and structure before deciding whether it deserves a place in your mental garden. When applied consistently, this technique gradually weakens the underlying root systems of negative thoughts, so they become less likely to regrow. Mindfulness serves as both fertilizer and weed prevention in your mental garden. Through regular practice, you develop metacognition, the ability to think about your thinking. This skill enables you to observe thoughts without attachment, catching problematic ones before they take root, and giving you precious moments to choose your response rather than reacting automatically. Gratitude practice functions as your seed planting ritual. Daily gratitude practice directs your attention to positive aspects of your experience that might otherwise go unnoticed. By regularly identifying 3 specific things you're grateful for each day, and importantly, articulating why they matter to you, you're training your brain to scan for positive elements rather than defaulting to threat detection. Over time, this creates new neural pathways that make positive perception increasingly automatic. A 4th essential implement is thought journaling, the equivalent of a garden log that tracks growth patterns. One client, a high-performing executive plagued by imposter syndrome, began documenting her thoughts whenever anxiety struck. After just 3 weeks, she noticed a pattern. Her self-doubt peaked before important presentations, always featuring the same catastrophic prediction that she'd be exposed as a fraud. Once identified, this pattern became something she could address directly rather than being controlled by it. Within 2 months, her confidence in presentations had transformed. The transformative power of thought journaling comes from externalization. When thoughts remain solely in your mind, they often feel absolute and overwhelming. Once written on paper, they become objects you can examine from different angles. Patterns become visible that were previously hidden, allowing you to identify recurring themes and triggers. These tools work together as an integrated system for mental transformation. When used in combination, they create a self-reinforcing cycle of positive change that gradually reshapes your entire mental ecosystem. As you begin working with these tools, pay particular attention to the 5 most damaging mental weeds: emotional reasoning, negative filtering, all-or-nothing thinking, personalization, and catastrophizing. Each requires specific adaptations of your basic techniques. For example, emotional reasoning responds well to fact-checking exercises, where you list objective evidence that contradicts your feelings. Negative filtering can be countered by deliberately documenting positive experiences. All-or-nothing thinking requires practicing spectrum thinking, where you identify the middle ground between extremes. What makes these tools powerful is their precision. Unlike generic approaches to positive thinking, they address the specific mechanisms through which thought patterns form and persist. They work with the brain's natural learning processes rather than fighting against them, gradually reshaping neural pathways through consistent practice. The evidence for their effectiveness is compelling. Studies looking at cognitive restructuring have found it reduces symptoms of anxiety and depression more effectively than medication alone in many cases. Mindfulness practices show measurable effects on brain regions associated with attention, emotional regulation, and stress response. Gratitude interventions correlate with improvements in mental health, sleep quality, and even physical health markers like inflammation levels. Most people attempt mental change with intuitive but ineffective approaches. They try to force positive thoughts through willpower, suppress negative ones through avoidance, or rely on vague affirmations without addressing underlying beliefs. These methods not only fail to produce lasting change, but often strengthen the very patterns they're trying to eliminate by directing more attention to them. The techniques we've discussed provide a more effective alternative, one that creates sustainable transformation through precision and consistency. Daily garden maintenance. implementing your mental cultivation practice. While studies confirm these powerful mind-shifting techniques can literally create new neural pathways, there's an uncomfortable truth that most personal development experts gloss over. Knowledge alone changes nothing. The difference between those who permanently transform their mental landscape and those who experience fleeting improvements comes down to one thing: daily practice. Even the most powerful mental gardening tools gather dust unless you use them consistently. I discovered this firsthand after attending a transformative weekend workshop. For 3 days, I felt invincible, armed with techniques that would surely change my life. By Wednesday, I was back to my old thought patterns, feeling like a failure. It wasn't until I committed to daily practice, just 5 minutes each morning, that real change began. 6 weeks later, thoughts that once consumed me barely registered. This wasn't magic, it was consistent implementation. The implementation phase is where theories become tangible changes in your lived experience. This is the point where many would-be mental gardeners abandon their efforts. They plant seeds of positive thinking during a workshop, then wonder why their mental garden hasn't transformed by Tuesday morning. Your brain responds to consistency above all else. Your brain prioritizes efficiency over accuracy, defaulting to established neural pathways because they require less energy. A 2018 study in the Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience found that participants needed at least 6 to 8 weeks of consistent practice before new thought patterns began to feel natural. Brain imaging showed that initial changes required high activation in the prefrontal cortex, but after consistent practice, these patterns began activating more automatically with less effort. Implementation transforms theoretical knowledge into lived experience. A gardener doesn't plant seeds and return months later expecting a flourishing garden. Your mental landscape requires daily attention to transform established patterns. Research from University College London found that forming a new habit takes about 66 days, not the commonly cited 21. The same research revealed that habit stacking, integrating new practices into existing routines, dramatically increased success rates. Rather than creating entirely new time blocks for mental gardening, attach these practices to routines you already perform automatically. Structure your mental gardening around natural transitions in your day. Morning serves as ideal ground for thought inventory. During your morning routine, pause for 3 minutes to notice the quality of your thoughts. Are anxious projections about the day already sprouting? Are self-critical thoughts taking root? Simply observing, without judgment, begins the implementation process. Midday provides a natural opportunity for mental weeding. Take a 2-minute check-in during lunch to identify unhelpful thoughts and apply cognitive restructuring tools to challenge them. Harvard Business School research found these micro-interventions throughout the day were more effective than longer sessions conducted less frequently. Evening is perfect for gratitude cultivation, intentionally focusing on positive aspects of your experience. This practice counters our brain's negativity bias. University of California researchers found consistent evening gratitude practices improved psychological well-being and created measurable changes in heart rate variability, suggesting deeper physiological benefits. Implementation never unfolds perfectly. Time constraints represent a common barrier. Start small. Micro-practices of 2 to 3 minutes can initiate neurological change when performed consistently. A 2020 study in behavior research and therapy found that participants who committed to just 2 minutes of daily practice showed greater long-term consistency than those attempting longer but irregular sessions. Emotional resistance presents another obstacle. When challenging deeply held negative beliefs, you may experience uncomfortable emotions or identity threat, the feeling that changing thought patterns somehow threatens who you are. This resistance manifests as forgetting, procrastination, or suddenly not having time. Acknowledge this resistance without judgment while reinforcing your commitment. University of Pennsylvania research found that participants who anticipated and planned for resistance were 63% more likely to maintain new practices. Consider writing a letter to your future resistant self, reminding them why this practice matters. Perhaps the most challenging obstacle occurs when old thought patterns resurface. Many interpret this as failure, yet neurologically, this is expected. A 2019 study in Nature Neuroscience revealed that even after establishing new neural pathways, old ones don't disappear. They become less automatically activated. This explains why during stress, old thought patterns often return. Develop a plan for these inevitable setbacks. University of Washington research suggests successful long-term habit changes have specific recovery strategies. Create an emergency pruning protocol. Steps to implement when old thought patterns resurface. This counteracts the what the hell effect, where one slip leads to abandoning new practices. Implementation is where transformation becomes tangible. Initial motivation naturally wanes after a few weeks, precisely when consistent practice becomes crucial. A study following cognitive behavioral intervention participants found those who continued practicing after motivation declined showed dramatically better outcomes. The difference between temporary improvement and lasting transformation lies in consistently applying techniques you already know. Participants who maintained daily practice for at least 8 weeks reported that what initially required conscious effort gradually became measuring growth, evaluating your mental garden progress. While consistency creates the foundation, there's a hidden element that determines whether your mental garden merely survives or genuinely thrives. The truth is, without a clear system to evaluate your progress, you're essentially gardening blindfolded. Research from the Journal of Positive Psychology reveals that people who implement specific tracking methods are 3 times more likely to maintain their mental transformation compared to those who rely solely on subjective feelings as progress indicators. Think about physical gardening for a moment. An experienced gardener plants seeds, then meticulously tracks their progress through a garden log, measuring soil pH, recording rainfall, monitoring plant height, and documenting what works. Your mental garden deserves this same systematic evaluation. The evaluation phase of our framework becomes essential to your progress, much like a gardener's journal is to a thriving garden. Creating evaluation systems might initially seem mechanical when applied to your thoughts. However, without these feedback mechanisms, you risk abandoning practices that are working because you can't see their subtle effects. I've experienced this myself, giving up meditation after 2 weeks because I couldn't immediately perceive benefits, only to discover later that consistent tracking would have revealed meaningful progress. A University of Michigan study found that participants using structured evaluation methods were 78% less likely to abandon beneficial practices compared to those relying on general impressions. Understanding the difference between leading and lagging indicators transforms how you evaluate mental progress. Leading indicators are early signs that predict future outcomes, like catching yourself in a negative thought pattern and redirecting it. Lagging indicators are the delayed but significant life results, such as improved relationships or career advancement that represent your mental garden's harvest. Dr. Teresa Amoble's research at Harvard revealed the progress principle. Tracking small wins creates a positive spiral of productivity. Participants who documented minor progress experienced higher motivation the following day. This principle applies perfectly to mental gardening. When I began tracking even small redirections of negative thoughts, I found my motivation to continue the practice significantly increased. To evaluate something as intangible as thoughts, establish a personal system with 3 components: daily check-ins, weekly reflections, and monthly assessments. For daily check-ins, use a simple rating scale each evening to assess factors like thought awareness and redirection success. These quick measures take less than 2 minutes, but provide valuable data points over time. Stanford research shows that brief daily check-ins increase thought pattern awareness by 42% compared to less frequent assessments. Weekly reflections involve deeper contemplation of patterns. Set aside 15 to 20 minutes at week's end to journal about questions like, what thought patterns dominated my mental landscape? How efficiently did I redirect negative thoughts? What techniques were most effective? And where did I struggle? These reflections help identify patterns invisible in day-to-day experience. Monthly assessments provide the big picture view. Measure key areas like thought frequency, emotional resilience, response to triggers, relationship quality, and alignment with core values. I've found that monthly reviews help me recognize subtle improvements that would otherwise go unnoticed, like realizing I haven't been triggered by criticism that would have devastated me months earlier. A particularly effective monthly tool is the Mental Garden Map, a visual representation where you map what's growing in different areas of your mental landscape. Dr. Richard Davidson's research suggests that spatial visualization techniques activate different neural networks than verbal assessments, potentially providing more comprehensive insights. What makes evaluation powerful isn't just collecting data, it's how you interpret that information. Learn to view setbacks as valuable feedback rather than failure evidence. When you notice increased negative thoughts, reframe it as "this shows me where my garden needs attention," rather than "I'm failing at mental gardening." Dr. Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset demonstrates that people who view challenges as learning opportunities show greater persistence and better outcomes than those interpreting difficulties as evidence of limitation. Applied to mental gardening, treat evaluation data as information to refine your approach, not judgment about your capabilities. The thought frequency chart is an effective tracking system where you monitor how often specific thought patterns occur. University of Pennsylvania research found that participants tracking thought frequency for 8 weeks reported a 63% increase in their ability to identify and redirect negative patterns. What distinguishes this from rumination is the quality of attention, observing thoughts with curiosity rather than judgment. The most encouraging aspect is watching metrics improve over time. Many report that deliberate tracking eventually becomes intuitive awareness. I've experienced this transformation firsthand. What began as conscious effort to document thoughts has become an automatic ability to notice patterns as they emerge. The power of evaluation transforms mental gardening from a hopeful practice to a scientific process with predictable results. Just as a physical gardener can predict what will bloom based on their care, your systematic evaluation reveals the direct relationship between mental gardening practices and the resulting changes in your thought patterns and life outcomes. The root system, identifying and transforming core beliefs. Beyond tracking your thoughts lies a deeper mystery that even the most diligent mental gardeners often miss. While you've been carefully monitoring and evaluating your thought patterns, there's an underground network influencing everything that grows in your mental landscape. Just as a gardener who continually cuts back weeds without addressing their extensive root system will face an endless battle, you might be treating symptoms while the true source remains untouched. Core beliefs function as the root system of your mental garden. These are the fundamental assumptions about yourself, others, and the world that silently direct what grows above. They're the foundational structures that generate thousands of thoughts throughout your life. Consider how a single apple tree produces countless apples over its lifetime. Similarly, a core belief like, "I'm not good enough," generates an endless stream of self-defeating thoughts across different areas of your life. The challenge with addressing only surface-level thoughts is that it creates a frustrating cycle. You might successfully redirect a negative thought today, only to find 10 similar ones sprouting tomorrow. This happens because the core belief remains intact and continues generating new expressions of the same fundamental assumption. This explains why people often experience initial success with positive thinking techniques, only to find themselves back at square 1 week later. Ask yourself, what recurring thought patterns keep appearing despite my efforts to change them? These belief systems form early. Research from developmental psychology shows that our core belief structures begin forming in early childhood, between ages 0 to 7, when our brains are highly receptive and lack critical thinking abilities. Dr. Jeffrey Young, founder of schema therapy, identified that early experiences, particularly those involving emotional deprivation, abandonment, or criticism, create early maladaptive schemas, the root systems of our mental gardens. A 2017 study published in the Journal of Personality Assessment found these early schemas have remarkable staying power, with participants showing consistent activation patterns decades after their formation. The researchers noted that these beliefs become neurologically embedded and operate largely outside conscious awareness. What makes core beliefs particularly powerful is their invisibility. They operate from the subconscious, shaping our perceptions, emotions, and behaviors without our awareness. They act as filters through which we interpret all experiences. If you hold the belief, "people always leave me," you'll likely notice and remember times when someone disappointed you while overlooking evidence of loyal relationships. Reflect. What experiences from my past might have shaped how I see myself and others today? To transform your mental garden, become an archaeological gardener, someone willing to dig beneath the surface. Begin with what psychologists call vertical descent, tracing surface thoughts to their source. When you notice a recurring negative thought like, "I'll probably fail at this project," ask yourself, what would it mean about me if this thought were true? Your answer might be, it would mean I'm incompetent. Going deeper, and what would that mean? Might reveal, it would mean I'm fundamentally flawed and unworthy. This excavation process often leads to universal core beliefs that psychologists have identified across cultures. Beliefs around worthiness. I'm not worthy enough. Safety. The world is dangerous. Control. I have no control. Connection. I'm fundamentally alone. And competence. I'm inadequate. Consider. Which of these core beliefs resonates most strongly with my own thought patterns? Your emotional reactions provide valuable clues. Strong emotional responses, especially those disproportionate to the situation, often signal that a core belief has been activated. If minor criticism sends you into a spiral of shame, you're likely dealing with a deep belief about your worth or competence. Language patterns offer another window. Pay attention to absolute statements containing always, never, everyone, or no one. Phrases like, I'll never succeed, or everyone will eventually reject me, connect to core beliefs. Watch for themes that repeat across different life domains. Patterns of abandonment in relationships, work, and hobbies signal a core belief at work. Ask yourself, what absolute statements do I make about myself or others? Once you've identified these root beliefs, how do you transform them? Evidence gathering serves as a powerful technique, systematically collecting experiences that contradict your limiting belief. For I'm fundamentally unlovable. Gather evidence of relationships where you've been valued and loved, creating a record you can review regularly. Belief experiments offer another approach. Test your core beliefs through real-world actions. If you believe, I'll be rejected if people see the real me, design graduated experiments where you reveal more authentic aspects of yourself in relationships, documenting the actual results. Identity-level work addresses who you believe yourself to be. This involves consciously cultivating a new self-narrative that incorporates evidence contradicting your limiting beliefs while acknowledging their origin with compassion. Dr. Kristin Neff's research on self-compassion shows that approaching this work with gentleness rather than judgment accelerates transformation. When you understand these beliefs developed as protection mechanisms during vulnerable periods, you can honor their original purpose while recognizing they no longer serve you. Root-level work creates exponential rather than linear change. When you transform a core belief, you simultaneously alter thousands of thoughts that would have emerged from that root over your lifetime. Consider these questions. What would change in my life if I no longer believed my limiting core belief? And what small step could I take today to test whether this belief is actually true? By identifying and transforming these fundamental beliefs, you're not just pruning individual negative thoughts. You're replanting your entire mental garden with healthier, more nourishing roots. The fertile soil, cultivating supportive mental conditions. After uncovering those deep-rooted beliefs, you might wonder why implementing change sometimes feels like planting delicate seedlings in concrete. The truth is, many people obsessively focus on changing individual thoughts while completely overlooking the fertility of the mental soil they're attempting to grow in. An oversight that explains why willpower alone rarely creates lasting transformation. Consider what happens when a gardener plants premium seeds in depleted, acidic soil. No matter how exceptional those seeds are, or how diligently the gardener waters them, they'll struggle to flourish. Your thoughts operate under precisely the same constraints. The environment surrounding your mental processes, what we might call your mental soil, determines whether positive thought patterns can take root and thrive, or whether they'll wither despite your best intentions. This mental soil consists of interconnected biological, environmental, and social factors that create the background conditions for your thought patterns. When this soil is rich and supportive, dark and crumbly between your fingers, earthy and alive with possibility, even modest mental gardening efforts yield impressive results. When it's depleted, dry, hard, and lacking nutrients, even the most determined efforts often produce minimal change, leaving you frustrated and wondering why techniques that work for others fail for you. The biological foundation of your mental soil begins with your brain's physiological state. Research from the University of California shows sleep deprivation impairs the prefrontal cortex by up to 26%, while amplifying amygdala reactivity. Nutritionally, diets high in refined carbohydrates create acidic mental soil favoring negative thought patterns, while omega-3s and antioxidants promote neurogenesis and enhance neuroplasticity. Your physical environment significantly impacts this mental terrain. Princeton University researchers discovered visual clutter competes for attention in your visual cortex, depleting cognitive resources for focused thinking. The social composition of your mental soil may be most crucial. Harvard's 80-year study found quality relationships predict well-being better than genetics, wealth, or fame. Media consumption functions as another soil component, with Stanford neuroscientists confirming the brain processes media as social experiences, essentially fertilizing your mental garden with whatever content you regularly consume. To assess your current mental soil quality, examine these 4 indicators. 1. Energy levels throughout typical days. Persistent afternoon crashes suggest depleted. Biological soil. 2. Stress recovery time. How quickly you return to baseline indicates soil resilience. 3. Relationship dynamics. Whether interactions energize or deplete you reveals social soil quality. 4. Environmental inputs. Spaces, media, and information sources you regularly expose yourself to. Fortunately, mental soil can be systematically enriched through targeted practices that feel like adding rich, dark compost to a struggling garden. Your thoughts will naturally grow stronger and more vibrant as the soil improves. Begin with boundary setting, the essential fencing that protects your garden from depletion. Time boundaries, designated periods for rest and recovery. Information boundaries, limits on news consumption and social media. Relationship boundaries, clear standards for how others may treat you. Environmental design offers another powerful intervention. University of Minnesota research found participants who restructured their physical spaces reported 43% greater success maintaining new thought patterns. Create spaces that feel open and inspiring, where light falls just right and elements are thoughtfully arranged to support your goals. Even small adjustments can significantly alter thought tendencies. Relationship cultivation represents perhaps the most profound soil enrichment technique. Dr. James Cohn's fMRI brain scans demonstrated that a supportive person's presence physically reduces the brain's threat response. By nurturing connections with growth-oriented individuals, you transform the neurochemical environment in which your thoughts develop, like adding beneficial microorganisms to garden soil. Consistent self-care practices function as essential soil amendments, gradually altering baseline conditions for thought formation. University of Massachusetts research found simple routines, adequate hydration, brief movement breaks, structured work-rest cycles, improved cognitive flexibility and stress resilience within just 2 weeks. What makes improving soil quality particularly powerful is its exponential impact on all mental gardening efforts. When your mental soil is nourished and supportive, cognitive restructuring techniques require less effort, positive thought patterns establish more readily, and neural pathways supporting beneficial beliefs strengthen more quickly. Your mental garden becomes both more productive and more resilient. To transform your mental soil starting today, implement a morning routine targeting soil quality before daily demands begin. This 3-part practice includes 1. Physical movement to stimulate neurochemical balance and cognitive flexibility. 2. Intentional nutrition providing optimal brain fuel rather than inflammatory inputs. 3. Conscious selection of first informational inputs, choosing inspiration or connection over news or work demands. Dr. Andrew Huberman explains that morning routines are particularly effective because they leverage the brain's natural sensitivity during the first hour after waking. By consistently exposing yourself to positive inputs during this neuroplastic window, you essentially set the soil pH for the entire day, making positive thought patterns emerge naturally rather than requiring constant maintenance. Like a garden transformed from hard-packed clay to rich, fragrant loam teeming with earthworms and beneficial organisms, your mental landscape can shift dramatically through these soil-enriching practices. As the texture and composition of your mental soil improves, you'll notice thoughts that once struggled to survive now flourish with minimal effort, creating a self-sustaining ecosystem of mental well-being. The living water, directing attention to nourish positive growth. That neuroplastic morning window is just the beginning of your daily mental gardening practice. What if you discovered the most precious resource you distribute isn't your time or energy, but your attention itself? This vital current flows continuously throughout your day, determining which mental plants receive nourishment and which gradually wither away. Most people remain unaware that they're systematically watering the very thought patterns they're trying to eliminate, while leaving their most beneficial mental flora parched and struggling. Consider how a garden responds to water distribution. Areas receiving abundant moisture flourish with vibrant growth, while neglected sections slowly fade. Your attention functions identically within your mental landscape. Research from UC Berkeley shows the brain allocates metabolic resources primarily to neural networks receiving consistent activation. Brain scans reveal that repeatedly attending to specific thoughts increases blood flow, glucose utilization, and neuronal firing in those regions, essentially watering those neural pathways. This biological mechanism explains why rumination creates such powerful momentum in your mental garden. Each time you return to worries about the future, replays of past mistakes, or perceived inadequacies, you're delivering precious nourishment to these thought patterns. A 2018 study in Nature Communications demonstrated that participants who engaged in just 15 minutes of rumination showed increased activity in the default mode network for up to 3 hours afterward, while simultaneously decreasing activity in brain regions associated with creative problem-solving and positive emotional processing. Take Sarah, a marketing executive constantly replaying a presentation mistake. Despite delivering dozens of successful presentations, her attention fixated exclusively on this single failure. The more she watered this thought, the larger it grew, eventually affecting her confidence in subsequent presentations. This selective watering created a self-reinforcing cycle until she learned to redirect her attention to her demonstrated strengths. The concept of attentional bias explains why this selective watering often happens outside conscious awareness. Dr. Emily Holmes describes attentional bias as the tendency to consistently notice and process certain types of information while excluding others. Her research shows that once a particular bias forms, it creates a self-reinforcing cycle where similar information becomes increasingly visible while contradictory information fades from perception. This explains why two people can experience the same event, yet walk away with entirely different perceptions. A person with a bias towards social rejection might notice every instance of being excluded while missing dozens of inclusion signals. Someone with a bias toward failure might catalogue every mistake while overlooking numerous successes. These represent your mental garden's current watering pattern, highlighting certain realities while others remain invisible. To transform these unconscious patterns, conduct an attention audit, tracking where your mental focus flows throughout a typical day. For 1 week, set an alarm to randomly interrupt your thinking process 5 to 7 times daily. Each time it sounds, note what you were thinking about and assign it to categories: problem solving, future worry, past rumination, present experience, or constructive planning. Most people discover shocking patterns in their attention allocation. A 2020 study found that the average person spends 47% of waking hours thinking about something other than their current activity, and this mental wandering usually skews negative. Participants reported significantly lower happiness when their minds were wandering compared to when they remained present. After completing your attention audit, identify your primary, overwatered thought categories. Common patterns include future catastrophizing, past rumination, social comparison, and self-criticism. Each represents a different form of misdirected attention, water flowing to mental plants that deplete rather than nourish your psychological ecosystem. Redirecting this flow requires 3 key practices: pattern interruption, pre-selection, and intentional cultivation. Pattern interruption functions like temporarily blocking an irrigation channel. Research shows that simple sensory shifts, splashing cold water on your face or changing your physical position, create neurological pattern breaks that disrupt entrenched thinking loops. These interruptions create crucial moments of choice, but they remain ineffective without pre-selection of alternative thought targets. Before attempting to redirect negative thought patterns, identify specific alternatives for each category of mental weed. For catastrophic future thinking, pre-select reasonable alternative scenarios. For rumination about past mistakes, prepare growth-oriented reflections. The final element, intentional cultivation, involves deliberately practicing directed attention toward your chosen alternatives. McGill University researchers found that participants who deliberately redirected attention to pre-selected positive alternatives demonstrated measurable changes in neural activation patterns after just 2 weeks of consistent practice. Most powerful is curiosity cultivation, approaching unwanted thoughts with genuine curiosity rather than avoidance. Dr. Judson Brewer demonstrated that when participants approached ruminations with curious attention, asking, "What sensations accompany this thought?" they activated completely different neural pathways than when trying to suppress the same thoughts. Brain scans revealed that this curious observation activated regions associated with cognitive flexibility rather than threat response. Participants reported that thoughts approached with curiosity gradually lost their emotional charge. Eventually, these practices create attention fluency, the ability to consciously direct your mental focus rather than having it captured by habitual patterns. A longitudinal study found that those who developed attention fluency reported significantly lower rates of anxiety and depression than control groups, even when facing comparable life challenges. The most practical daily implementation involves trigger planning, identifying your common entry points into negative thought spirals and preparing specific redirection practices for each. These might include shifting attention to bodily sensations, engaging in brief breath awareness, or deliberately activating a positive memory. Consistently interrupting negative patterns at their initiation point requires far less effort than attempting to redirect physical benefits fully of mental gardening. After implementing these redirection techniques for just a few weeks, something extraordinary begins to unfold. Your brain, the 3-pound universe between your ears, undergoes physical transformations that scientists can actually observe under brain imaging. What if the thoughts you cultivate today are literally building the biological infrastructure that will determine your health, cognitive abilities, and emotional resilience for decades to come? Let me share Sarah's story. After struggling with anxiety for years, she committed to daily thought redirection practices. The first month was challenging, she recalls. But after 6 weeks, my colleagues noticed I was responding differently to workplace stress. By month 3, my brain had literally rewired itself. The situations that once triggered panic now felt manageable. Sarah's experience mirrors what neuroscience reveals about mental gardening. Consistent practice creates observable changes in brain structure and function. Most people approach positive thinking as a pleasant psychological exercise that might temporarily improve mood, but has little substantive impact. This perspective misses the profound biological reality. Your thoughts physically restructure your brain with every mental gardening session. Research from the University of Wisconsin's Center for Healthy Minds demonstrates that consistent thought pattern redirection creates measurable changes in neural density in as little as 8 weeks. These represent fundamental rewiring of your neurological architecture. When you consistently prune negative thought patterns, you physically alter how your brain processes information. Studies conducted at UCLA revealed that participants who practiced daily thought redirection for 12 weeks showed 21% decrease in amygdala reactivity, the brain's threat detection center, increased activation in the prefrontal cortex, executive function center. This shift represents a neurological power transfer from your reactive emotional centers to your thoughtful planning centers. Your brain redistributes its resources based on which networks you consistently activate. The timeline of these benefits follows a predictable pattern. Immediate benefits, within minutes, normalized heart rate, decreased muscle tension, more regular breathing patterns. These immediate rewards provide valuable reinforcement during early practice stages. The simple act of redirecting attention from negative rumination to positive alternatives creates an almost instantaneous shift in emotional state. Intermediate benefits, days to weeks, improved sleep quality, 27% improvement in sleep efficiency according to sleep medicine reviews, increased attention span, a greater emotional stability. These improvements create a positive feedback loop. Better sleep enhances cognitive function, making thought redirection easier the following day. Long-term benefits, months to years, increased gray matter density in regions associated with attention and compassion, improved immune function with lower inflammatory markers, enhanced production of natural killer cells, reduced blood pressure and arterial inflammation. A longitudinal study tracking practitioners over 2 years found these structural brain changes correlated with measurable improvements in physical health. Participants showed significantly lower levels of inflammatory markers compared to control groups. The findings align with groundbreaking research from psychoneuroimmunology, revealing direct pathways connecting thought patterns to physical health. When you consistently cultivate positive thought patterns, you modulate your entire inflammatory response system. Harvard Medical School research found these cardiovascular benefits occurred independent of other lifestyle factors, suggesting the direct physiological impact of thought patterns on heart function. What makes these findings particularly remarkable is their compounding nature. Each day of mental gardening multiplies your progress. Neuroscientists call this self-reinforcing neural plasticity. New neural pathways become progressively easier to activate with consistent use. Your initial efforts might require significant conscious attention, but over time, these redirected thought patterns become your brain's default operation mode. This neurological compounding extends beyond brain structure to influence virtually every domain of life. Improved relationship quality. 34% greater cognitive flexibility when approaching challenges. Enhanced financial decision-making and long-term planning. Stanford University researchers discovered that the benefits follow a non-linear trajectory. The most substantial improvements often occurred after participants moved beyond the initial enthusiasm phase and continued practicing through periods of doubt. This suggests that persisting when practice feels most challenging yields the greatest neurological dividends. Understanding this reality transforms how you approach daily mental gardening. You're actively constructing your future neurological architecture. Each time you interrupt a negative thought spiral and redirect to a positive alternative, you physically strengthen neural pathways that eventually become automatic. The neurological harvest of consistent mental gardening reveals itself most clearly in how your brain processes challenging situations. After months of practice, your amygdala becomes less reactive to potential threats, your prefrontal cortex activates more readily, and new neural pathways form that make positive interpretations increasingly automatic rather than requiring conscious effort. This transformation represents a fundamental shift in your neurological default settings, from threat detection and negative bias to opportunity recognition and balanced perspective. The long-term practitioner doesn't need to constantly monitor their thoughts because their brain has been physically restructured to naturally generate more constructive interpretations of experience. The changing seasons, adapting your mental gardening through life's challenges. While that balanced perspective you've cultivated might seem robust, what happens when life delivers an unexpected emotional storm? Your mental garden, like any physical landscape, must weather changing seasons and unpredictable challenges that test even the most diligent gardener's resolve. Just as gardens face droughts, floods, and harsh winters, our minds encounter periods of grief, burnout, and major transitions. Research from the University of Cambridge reveals that 78% of people abandon their mental well-being practices during precisely the periods when they need them most. This creates a vulnerability cycle where our mental defenses collapse exactly when facing our greatest challenges. Different emotional seasons require fundamentally different approaches. Dr. Lucy Hone, a resilience researcher who experienced the tragic loss of her daughter, discovered that grief demands a unique form of mental cultivation. Her research at the New Zealand Institute of Wellbeing and Resilience shows that during grief, traditional positivity practices can increase suffering, while selective attention toward meaningful connections provides genuine sustenance. During grief, your mental garden requires protective conservation of emotional resources rather than forced growth. Anxiety, however, responds differently. University of Pennsylvania psychologist Dr. Martin Seligman found that cognitive challenging techniques produce better results than either distraction or emotional processing alone. Meanwhile, burnout responds most effectively to what researchers at the Karolinska Institute call attentional restoration, deliberate exposure to environments requiring minimal directed attention while activating involuntary attention through natural settings. This variation explains why one-size-fits-all mental practices often fail during life transitions. A study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology tracked participants through major life changes and found that those who adapted their mental practices showed remarkable resilience, while those rigidly maintaining identical practices experienced significantly higher distress. Consider Maria, a therapist who thrived on daily meditation and journaling until her father's unexpected illness. When these practices suddenly felt overwhelming, she switched to brief breath awareness exercises during hospital visits and voice-recorded reflections during her commute. By adapting rather than abandoning her mental gardening, she maintained emotional stability during a difficult season. The key psychological trait underpinning this adaptability is what Dr. Stephen Hayes calls psychological flexibility, the ability to contact the present moment while adjusting behaviors to serve valued ends. Research from his team at the University of Nevada found that this flexibility predicts mental health outcomes better than almost any other psychological variable, accounting for over 40% of the variance in psychological well-being during challenging periods. So how do you create contingency plans for different mental seasons? Start by developing, if-then implementations, for various emotional weather patterns. When experiencing crisis, implement an intensive care protocol that prioritizes protective structures over growth. This means simplifying your mental garden through focused attention on only the most essential elements, basic self-care, connection with key supporters, and temporary acceptance of reduced cognitive capacity. Dr. Shauna Shapiro at Santa Clara University found that crisis periods require radical self-compassion, the deliberate suspension of growth expectations in favor of basic psychological safety. Her research shows that participants who practiced this approach during acute stress recovered more quickly and retained more previous progress than those attempting to maintain their full practice regimen. For busy periods when time constraints threaten consistency, Dr. B.J. Fogg's research at Stanford University demonstrates that maintaining minimal viable practices, tiny habits, preserves neural pathways far more effectively than temporarily abandoning practices altogether. Even 60-second versions of key mental techniques maintain enough continuity to prevent complete regression. During periods of stability and strength, this becomes the optimal time to expand your mental garden through deliberate exploration of new thought patterns. Dr. Barbara Fredrickson's broaden and build theory demonstrates that positive emotional states create ideal conditions for experimenting with new mental approaches that may serve you during future challenging periods. The most resilient mental gardeners develop what University of Michigan researcher Dr. Jane Dutton calls psychological emergency kits, pre-prepared interventions for moments when rational thinking becomes compromised. These kits contain simple, accessible practices implementable even when cognitive resources are severely depleted. Healthcare workers who prepared such kits showed 43% greater emotional stability during crisis events compared to those formulating responses in the moment. These emergency techniques include Dr. Andrew Huberman's physiological size, specifically patterned double inhale breathing that rapidly deactivates stress responses at the autonomic level. This technique directly engages the vagus nerve, creating immediate downregulation of the sympathetic nervous system before cognitive interventions become possible. Protection of your mental garden during emotional storms also requires psychological pre-mortem planning, anticipating potential derailments before they occur. Dr. Gary Klein's research demonstrates that mentally rehearsing specific challenges creates neural preparedness that dramatically improves real-world implementation. This adaptation capacity transforms mental gardening from a temporary project into a sustainable lifetime practice. The Harvard study of adult development found that participants demonstrating this adaptability maintained stable psychological health despite facing similar challenges as peers who experienced significant deterioration during difficult periods. When you inevitably face setbacks, approach them with curiosity rather than judgment. Dr. Carol Dweck's work shows that viewing setbacks as informational feedback creates dramatically different neurological responses than seeing them as personal failures. Participants who responded to mental gardening setbacks with flexible adaptation showed 67% greater recovery rates and ultimately developed more sophisticated approaches. The most powerful approach combines self-distanced analysis, examining setbacks from a third-person perspective, with immediate recommitment to adjusted practices. This technique creates the optimal condition for extracting useful information from failures without becoming entangled in self-criticism. As we've journeyed together from the untamed wilderness of unchecked thoughts to a carefully tended mental landscape, I hope you've discovered something profound. This work never truly ends. The garden of your mind will continue to grow whether you participate or not. The difference lies in your conscious engagement. Through each phase of mental cultivation we've explored, you've reclaimed your power as the gardener of your consciousness. The seeds you plant today become the reality you inhabit tomorrow. Your thoughts shape your experience through intentional living. What will you cultivate